Imagine pulling on your shirt in the morning. Instead of fabric brushing against your skin, you feel a small pouch filled with honey, blood, or rancid grease, strapped to your chest or hanging from your belt. It sounds disgusting, doesn't it? But in the Middle Ages, this wasn't a bizarre punishment or even a medical treatment. It was survival. Before we dive deeper, hit subscribe right now, because the story you're about to hear is one that was never meant to survive in the history books. The truth of how medieval people lived. The filth, the desperation, the terrifying creativity was often erased, dismissed, or ridiculed as mere superstition. But when you look closer, you discovered that these grotesque little details of daily life weren't nonsense at all. They were life and death. So let us step back into that world. A world where fleas were more feared than wolves, more dangerous than swords, and in many ways more powerful than kings. In the Middle Ages, fleas were everywhere. You couldn't escape them. They lived in your bedding, in your clothes, in the hay of your animals, and in the rushes that covered the floors of even noble halls. Every time you sat down, lay in bed, or walked through a street, fleas jumped onto you. And unlike lice, which were seen as merely irritating, fleas carried something far worse: disease. Kate. They were the invisible killers behind the Black Death, which in the mid-14th century wiped out as much as half of Europe's population. Imagine entire villages gone. Cities like Florence reduced to silence. And at the heart of it all, a parasite smaller than a grain of rice. People didn't know about bacteria or viruses, but they noticed patterns. They saw that fleas clung to fur, that sickness spread where fleas thrived, and that those who managed to keep themselves cleaner somehow fared a little better. And so, in the absence of modern science, they turned to something both ingenious and revolting: flea traps. The logic was simple. If fleas are drawn to blood, heat, sweat, and filth, why not give them an easier target than your own skin? So peasants, monks, and even nobles began to wear small cloth or leather pouches under their clothes. Inside these pouches were substances designed to lure fleas away. Some filled them with animal blood, others with honey, cheese, or spoiled meat. A few accounts even mention moss soaked in wine or clumps of hair taken from animals. A pouch would be strapped close to the body so that fleas already crawling on a person would smell the stronger lure and crawl inside. Once full, the pouch could be emptied into a fire, destroying the insects. In some monasteries, wool soaked in goat's blood was the preferred bait, tucked into sleeves or waistbands, then shaken out into the flames after prayers. For peasants, it was often cruder: a rag smeared with grease or rancid fat, queued around the ankle or stuffed into the hem of a tunic. If it reduced bites even slightly, it was worth the discomfort. Think of it: men, women, and children walking through the streets, carrying little sacks of rot and blood against their skin. The smell, the stickiness, the horror of it. But the alternative was worse: endless itching, infected bites, and the looming specter of plague. You might be wondering, did these traps really exist, or is this just rumor? The answer lies in the strange fragments of evidence that have survived. Archaeologists excavating medieval cesspits and trash layers in London and Paris have found scraps of cloth stained with what appears to be dried blood and grease. Some of these rags show stitching designed to form small pouches, and in one case, the cloth was found alongside the remains of fleas. Even more chilling are the manuscripts. In the margins of a 14th century medical text, a scribe added a note in Latin: "The vermin are drawn to blood, not thine own." Scholars believe this is one of the earliest written references to flea traps. And in the records of a Florentine physician, complaint survives. He begged monks to stop reusing communal wool pads soaked in blood, warning that they spread the invisible sickness through abbeys. Weeks later, the physician himself died, and his warnings were conveniently forgotten. It's like almost everything in the Middle Ages, flea traps weren't equal. Peasants used rags, grease, straw, and whatever foul substance they could find, the poor stank of their own defenses. But in noble houses, traps could be elaborate, soft leather pouches lined with linen, filled with perfumed bait, or treated with herbs like lavender and mint. These noble traps were worn under silken garments, almost like amulets, carefully hidden so that no one could see their wearer was battling the same vermin as the peasants outside. Some nobles even employed servants whose task was to prepare these traps fresh each morning, filling them with bait and then discreetly disposing of them by evening. Hygiene itself became a marker of class. Here's the real question. If these flea traps were used widely, why don't we hear about them in official chronicles? Why are they not taught in history classes, not depicted in paintings, not mentioned in sermons? Because to acknowledge them would have meant acknowledging that fleas were dangerous. That filth was not just a matter of sin or cleanliness, but of survival. The church, however, often discouraged talk of bodily hygiene, framing disease as divine punishment rather than something preventable. If fleas spread the plague, then perhaps God was not punishing humanity. Perhaps humanity was simply filthy and unprepared, and that truth was inconvenient. So instead of education, silence ruled. Priests instructed their flocks not to discuss bodily practices. Monks who recorded details were censored or ignored. Manuscripts that hinted too clearly at hygiene as prevention were quietly redacted. And the story of flea traps, grotesque, desperate, and revealing, nearly disappeared. Imagine being a medieval peasant. You sleep on a straw mattress filled with vermin. You share your one-room hut with goats, chickens, and a pig. Every night, fleas crawl over your skin. You wake up scratching. Your only hope is a pouch tied to your waist, a pouch that smells like death. Perhaps it's filled with rancid meat, perhaps with blood from the goat you slaughtered last winter. You wear it all day. You itch, you sweat, but you pray it keeps the fleas away from your children. Now, imagine being a nobleman. Sleep on feather pans, in chambers lined with tapestries. We even hear fleas swarm, so you wear a silk pouch under your shirt, baited not with rancid scraps, but with herbs and sweetened wine. You pretend it doesn't exist. You smile at banquets. But you know the truth. You, too, are prey. The flea was the great equalizer. It cared nothing for gold, rank, or power. And the flea trap, disgusting as it was, became a quiet, hidden weapon in that eternal war. The forgotten lesson, and here's where it all becomes more than just trivia. Because flea traps show us something vital. People in the Middle Ages knew. They weren't ignorant, okay? They saw the connection between parasites and sickness, okay? They improvised defenses, okay? They adapted. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. Suppressed by religion, limited by technology, divided by class, their efforts were patchwork. The plague still came. Millions still died. And the truth that fleas and filth killed, not God's wrath, was buried along with them. So, the next time you spray insect repellent, wash your sheets, or complain about a mosquito bite, remember this? Not so long ago, people strapped sacks of blood and grease to their bodies just to survive. History almost forgot it. So I'll leave you with this chilling question. Would you have worn one of these traps, or would you have risked the bite? Drop your answer in the comments, because I read every single one. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe. There are far darker truths about medieval life still to uncover. Truths that were buried for centuries, ones you won't find in the history books.